John. Then was it Catherine and then Dad? In birth order?
I think Helen was older than Dad.
Okay. Was Catherine older than Dad too?
Who?
Catherine?
Catherine was older than Dad.
So he was kind of in the middle then.
Okay. He was in the middle. So then Grandpa was working. Do you remember in the middle of the 1950s when, do you remember hearing about Rosa Parks at all? Or do you remember anything about blacks trying to get more equal rights? That was just after
I remember when I was in Cleveland, or would have been Joe and Dad. The blacks still were seated in the back.
In the back of the buses?
Did you ever think about that?
Really, when you were young and trying to make ends meet with the little ones.
So you were just so concerned about just
your family,
taking care of getting your family by.
That's right.
There wasn't a lot of.
That's right.
You weren't too concerned about that.
Right, you had to take care of.
Grandma, do you remember ever hearing about a guy named Jack Kerouac?
Who, Jack?
Jack Kerouac. He was kind of an artist in the 1950s. He was a writer.
No, see, I don't remember.
No. Do you remember the Suez Canal? Do you remember what was happening with that in 1956?
That's when Carter gave...
Not Carter.
Eisenhower. That's okay. That's okay, Grandma. You helped me out a lot. You gave me a lot of very good information, and thank you very, very much for that.
Wait, do you remember when Kennedy was running for president?
Oh, yeah, that's a Bay of Pigs. I remember that. And, well, I thought it was it Eisenhower that gave the Panama Canal when people were...
Suez Canal.
Suez Canal gave the Panamanians the canal. Is it Eisenhower?
Yeah. It was Eisenhower, and then after Eisenhower gave the Suez Canal back, a few years later, that's when Kennedy was voted in. Do you remember when Kennedy was elected?
Oh, yes.
What do you remember about Kennedy?
Well, that's when people were biased. They thought Kennedy would never get it because he was a Catholic, and
because he was a Catholic.
Because he was Catholic. That's right.
Yes.
Because he was Catholic.
Oh wow.
Yes, that was a very big thing.
That was a big thing then, and the Protestants were saying that he'll bring the Pope in, and it was so ridiculous. It was, you know what I mean.
Grandma, do you remember who Kennedy beat? Do you remember who he ran against?
Who the heck did he run against?
He ran against Nixon, didn't he?
Chucky Dicky.
Dicky.
Do you remember the debates? Do you remember watching the debates between Kennedy and Nixon?
I remember that.
Okay, now were you more interested in this election because Kennedy was Catholic and you were Catholic? Do you think?
Well, there was so much against Nixon that, you know what I mean.
Why? What was against Nixon at that point in time?
At that time in time.
What was against Nixon?
Nixon was a smart man, but What was he doing? It wasn't with,
How do you do this?
No, yeah, just.
what the heck did he do?
Well, do you think your being Catholic influenced your voting for Kennedy?
I think so because the people were so against him, saying that he wouldn't, all this ridiculous things about the Catholics that was outrageous.
Grandma, do you remember when they were talking about Medicare? When Kennedy was talking about Medicare and extending Social Security?
He wasn't in office that long, but he was able to. That's when.
He was able to do a lot in a little bit of time.
Yes, I remember with the Bay of Pigs. That was.
What can you tell me about the Bay of Pigs that you remember?
The Russians would come in and take over. As far as I remember that. That's about it. Really.
So the thought was that the Russians were going to take over Cuba, and then from Cuba they would take over the United States, and so there was that.
What did you think about the Cuban Missile Crisis? Do you remember Fidel Castro, or Grandma?
Oh, he used to talk for hours and hours. He was, but I still think that the United States should help Cuba people now. They suffered long enough, because if you see now that they can't find parts to the cars or.
Were you ever worried about bombs going off? Were you ever worried about Cuba ever hurting us?
No, I never thought about that. Really, I didn't.
No. What about when Vietnam was starting, Grandma? Do you remember any of that?
Yes, I thought Vietnam, they shouldn't have been in there.
You didn't think they should have been there?
Did you think that from the start?
From the start, yeah, they should have. It was wrong because they couldn't tell, the U.S. soldiers couldn't tell which was the enemy, which was the
innocent
people, yes.
Do you remember?
Yeah, it was a different kind of a warfare than we had before. So that
It was the first time there wasn't clearly soldiers
Guerrilla
in uniforms.
warfare.
Well, the Korean War was actually before that.
See, I don't know much about the Korean War because Jack Palguda was in the Korean War.
Who was Jack Palguda?
Uncle John's son, so a nephew. His mom.
Did he get out okay?
Did I what?
Did Jack Palguda, was he okay when he left?
Yes, he was.
Okay. So you don't remember much about that. Do you remember when Kennedy was assassinated, Grandma?
Oh, yes.
What can you tell me about that?
Well, they're still thinking that it was a conspiracy.
Do you think it was a conspiracy?
At that time, there was so much against Kennedy. I mean,
who was against Kennedy? What was against Kennedy?
And that fellow that shot Kennedy.
Oswald.
Oswald.
But what would have been led to a conspiracy theory? Who would have been
I don't think there was a conspiracy. Really, I don't.
Okay, so you think Oswald acted alone?
Yeah, I think so. But they say not. I don't know. So don't get me into trouble because of that.
We're not going to get you into any trouble. Okay, after Kennedy was assassinated, do you remember Lyndon B. Johnson taking over?
Oh, he took over on the Air Force.
Yeah. What did you think about him?
He was very crude, very, he wasn't very
Sophisticated.
sophisticated like the other
Presidents.
president, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you remember?
Bring her over towards you.
Bring her over towards me.
Yeah, she's tipping.
Grandma, you need to stop tipping. You're falling over. Grandma, do you remember what was happening in, do you remember the march from Selma to Montgomery with the blacks? Do you remember any of